My friends, let us come together for a moment of quiet recognition, not to add anything to ourselves, not to search for new doctrines or more spiritual techniques, but simply to rest in an awareness that has been present since before we formed the first thought about God. For centuries, humanity has sought the Christ in temples, in scriptures, in rituals, in systems of belief. We have traveled great distances in the hope that somewhere someone could reveal to us a secret, unlock a mystery, or place into our hands a key that would open the gates of heaven. And yet, in all this long journeying, very few have paused to consider that the treasure they sought was never hidden, never distant, never withheld. The Christ is not something you discover in time. The Christ is what you have always been in truth. When Jesus spoke of the kingdom of God, he did not direct anyone outward. He did not say that the kingdom is found in a holy mountain, or in a book, or in a system of worship. He said very simply, the kingdom of God is within you. If there is a message the world has forgotten, it is this one. If there is a truth that religion has complicated, embellished, and sometimes concealed beneath layers of doctrine, it is this one. The kingdom is within you. Christ is within you. The presence you seek is the very essence of your own being. It is only because we have been conditioned to look outside ourselves that this appears hidden. We have been taught to wait for God, to plead with God, to earn the favor of God, and in this long habit of looking outward, we have missed the central truth that the divine life is already embodied as our life, that the divine consciousness is already the substance of our consciousness. I do not ask you to accept this as a belief. Belief does not open the kingdom. I ask only that you become still enough to sense the truth that is even now whispering within you, not a distant God speaking from the heavens, but the gentle movement of the Christ in your very awareness, saying, I am here. I am your life. I am your identity. This realization does not belong to any religion. It is not Christian, nor Jewish, nor Hindu, nor Buddhist. It is the universal truth that every mystical teaching has pointed toward. Religion may point the way, but it cannot give you the experience. Scriptures may describe the nature of God, but they cannot reveal God to you. Teachers may speak of the Christ, but they cannot place the Christ within you. For the Christ was never missing. It requires no insertion, only recognition. Let us, then, set aside the notion that Christ consciousness is a doctrine to accept, or a theory to debate, or an achievement to attain. It is none of these. It is the simple awareness of the divine presence that has always been your life. When you release the search in the outer world, when you stop trying to improve the human self by human means, when you surrender the belief that God is somewhere else waiting to be reached, in that moment of quiet surrender, something begins to stir, a peace you did not create, a stillness you did not initiate, a presence you did not summon. This is the Christ revealing itself. This is the inner kingdom becoming known. We stand together today, not to gather more spiritual ideas, but to lay them aside. Not to strengthen the personal sense of self, but to watch it gently dissolve in the realization of a deeper identity. Not to form yet another spiritual path, but to step into the truth that has been present long before paths were named. Christ consciousness does not begin with belief. It begins with silence, with recognition, with the smallest willingness to look within. As we continue, let us hold this truth quietly. There is nothing to become. There is only something to remember. My friends, let us move a degree deeper into this inner journey. For if the kingdom of God is within you, and if Christ is the light of your own consciousness, then we must gently examine how it happened that humanity came to seek outwardly for what Jesus himself pointed inward. This is not a criticism of religion. It is simply an observation, an understanding. Religion, at its best, holds noble intention. It offers structure, community, devotion, and a reverent posture toward the sacred. But over time, institutions can forget the spirit in their devotion to form, and the forms that were meant to reveal God can begin to replace God in the minds of those who follow them. In the days when Jesus walked the earth, the religious world of his time was filled with rules, traditions, and rituals intended to bring people closer to God. Yet Jesus did not emphasize these. He did not instruct his disciples to perfect rituals or memorize doctrines. His message was startling in its simplicity. Follow me. What did he mean by that? He did not mean imitate my human footsteps. He meant follow the consciousness that I embody. Follow the inner light. Follow the presence that expresses through me, and it will express through you. He spoke not of religion, but of realization. Yet after his departure, something began to shift. Instead of recognizing that the Christ he revealed was the universal presence within all, many began to worship the person and forget the principle. They began to revere the messenger and lose sight of the message. And once again, God became distant, separate, something to be reached, something to be obtained. This, my friends, is the great misunderstanding. When Jesus spoke of the Father, he was not speaking of a deity far removed from the world, sitting upon a throne of judgment. He spoke of an indwelling presence, an infinite intelligence that lived as his very being. The Father within me, he doeth the works. How could religion hear this and yet continue to teach a God outside the individual? And yet, through centuries of repetition, the outer God became the dominant image. Jesus spoke of spirit, but religion offered us form. Jesus spoke of inner realization, but religion offered us belief. Jesus spoke of oneness, but religion often taught separation. And because humanity did not understand the simplicity of his teaching, we began to strive. We began to feel unworthy. We began to imagine that God must be persuaded, pleased, convinced. We began to pray upward instead of inward. We began to look to religious authorities to tell us what God requires instead of listening to the still small voice already speaking within our own hearts. This is not to condemn religion, but to clarify the path back to truth. For Jesus never required membership. He never insisted on dogma. He never instructed anyone to place intermediaries between themselves and God. He taught the absolute opposite. Call no man on earth your father, for one is your Father. Neither shall they say, Lo here, or Lo there, for the kingdom of God is within you. What could be more direct? What could be more freeing? Goldsmith reminded us again and again, whenever an outer authority claims the power to grant you access to God, you may be sure the truth has been obscured. No church, no teacher, no scripture, not even Jesus himself can bring God to you. They can only reveal what is already present. They can point, but they cannot give, because the divine cannot be given. It can only be recognized. The misunderstanding was never malicious. It was only human. We looked outward because we forgot how to look inward. We sought security in forms because we did not trust the invisible. We clung to doctrines because we feared the silence in which God is actually heard. But the moment you understand that Christ is not a religious figure but the divine essence of your own being, the misunderstanding dissolves. You no longer need to argue with religion nor abandon it. You simply transcend the limitation. You step into the universality of truth. You realize that the teaching Jesus brought forth was not meant to build an institution. It was meant to awaken a consciousness. And that awakening happens in you, here, now, without ceremony, without effort, without permission. Let us hold this quietly. Jesus pointed within. Religion pointed without, but the inward path has always remained open. The misunderstanding is undone the instant you turn your attention back to the place Jesus directed you, the kingdom within. My friends, as we enter this next movement of our inner journey, let us become very still, not because stillness is holy in itself, but because in stillness we begin to feel what words cannot contain. For Christ consciousness is not a concept to be accepted with the mind. It is an awareness that reveals itself when the mind grows quiet enough to receive what has always been present. Let us approach this truth gently. When we speak of the Christ, we are not speaking of a man. We are not speaking of Jesus in his historical identity, although he embodied the Christ more perfectly than any other whose life has been recorded. But if we limit the Christ to Jesus, we miss the very purpose of his life. Jesus came not to demonstrate what he was, but what you are. He came not to claim divinity for one person, but to reveal divinity as the essence of every person. Christ is the divine nature of you. Christ is the spiritual identity behind the name, behind the personality, behind the mask you have worn in the world. This is why Jesus spoke in the first person universal. He said, I, not to identify the human Jesus, but to speak from the standpoint of the Christ. I am the light of the world. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Before Abraham was, I am. When he spoke these words, he did not mean Jesus. The man existed before Abraham. He meant the Christ, the eternal I, the presence of God individualized. And this same I is the truth of your being. Do you see how this dissolves the sense of separation? Do you see how this lifts the burden of trying to reach God or please God or find God? There is no distance to cover. There is only an inner identity waiting to be recognized. Christ consciousness, as Goldsmith taught, is the awareness of oneness. Oneness with God, oneness with all life, oneness with the infinite source that is forever expressing as your very breath. Christ consciousness is the recognition that you are not a fragment seeking to return to a whole. You are the whole expressing one of its infinite forms. It is the awareness that God does not stand apart from you. God is the life you are living. God is the intelligence operating your being. God is the substance of every breath, every thought, every movement of your existence. To awaken to the Christ is to awaken from the dream of separation. You see, the human sense of life believes, I am here and God is there. The Christ sense of life knows, I live, yet not I. The Father within me is the life that is living. The human sense prays for supply. The Christ sense recognizes that divine supply is the very nature of consciousness. The human sense fears sickness and death. The Christ sense knows that life is infinite, eternal, never born, never dying. Christ consciousness is not something you attain through discipline or religious achievement. It is the natural state of your being, obscured only by false belief. It is like the sun hidden by clouds. The sun does not have to be summoned. The clouds only need to part. And how do they part? Not by effort, not by struggle, but by recognition. Recognition is the opening. Recognition is the doorway. Recognition is the moment you stop identifying with the limited human self and begin to rest in the truth of your spiritual self. This is why Goldsmith said that the Christ does not come to you, it appears through you. It unfolds as the dawning awareness that the presence you have sought in books, in teachings, in rituals, in teachers, has been the essence of your own consciousness all along. Christ is not something added. Christ is something revealed. Christ is not a divine supplement to your humanity. Christ is the truth behind your humanity. And so, when you turn within, when you become still, when you rest in quiet acknowledgement, something subtle begins to occur. You begin to sense that your thoughts are not the source of your life. You begin to feel a presence behind you, within you, as you begin to realize that what you call I is not the limited being you have assumed yourself to be, but the living expression of the infinite. This is Christ consciousness, a state where the world loses its power to frighten you, a state where appearances lose their authority, a state where supply, harmony, healing, and peace are not sought but recognized as already established in the divine selfhood. This recognition does not come with thunder or emotion. It comes quietly, like the unfolding of dawn. The light does not rush in. It reveals itself gently. But when it does, not believe, but know that God is the very life of your life. This knowing is Christ consciousness. This is the truth. Jesus lived. This is the truth. Goldsmith dedicated his life to revealing. And this, my friends, is the truth of you. My friends, let us now gently approach one of the most sacred transitions in the spiritual life, the shift from identifying ourselves as human beings, striving toward God, to recognizing ourselves as spiritual beings expressing God. This shift is not an achievement, nor is it an attainment. It is not reached through struggle, nor is it acquired through greater belief. It is simply the moment when you begin to see through the illusion of the human self and awaken to the deeper truth of your being. For ages, we have been conditioned to believe that we are creatures of flesh and blood, born into a world of limitation, subject to fear, lack, sickness, and death. We have been taught that the body is our identity, that the mind is our guide, and that the material world is our source. And because we accepted this sense of self, we lived according to its limitations. But, my friends, you cannot lift yourself out of limitation while clinging to the identity that creates it. You cannot experience the freedom of the Spirit while insisting that you are first and foremost a human personality. And so, the beginning of liberation, the doorway to Christ consciousness, is the recognition that your human identity has never been your true identity. The human self is not the truth of you. It is the shadow of a greater self, the appearance of a deeper reality. Goldsmith would say, you are not human trying to become spiritual. You are spirit appearing as human. There is a profound difference in this understanding. When you believe you are human striving upward toward God, you will always feel unworthy, incomplete, and separate. You will pray to God as if God is elsewhere. You will try to fix your challenges as though life is happening to you rather than through you. But the moment you glimpse that your true identity is spiritual, that the life you call I is God, expressing as individual being, everything changes. You no longer pray for God to come to you. You recognize that God has been your very essence since the beginning. You no longer fight appearances. You see them as passing shadows, powerless to touch the reality of your being. You no longer measure yourself by success, failure, age, or circumstance. Your worth is derived from the divine nature itself. This is the shift. It is not dramatic. It is not accompanied by emotional fireworks. It is subtle, gentle, like waking from a dream. You look at the world, and suddenly you sense that it is not operating by material laws alone. You look at your body, and you begin to realize it is not the source of your life, but the instrument through which life is expressing. You look at your thoughts and feelings, and you understand they are not the self, but movements passing through the self. And above all, you begin to feel a new center, a place of stillness, peace, and assurance that does not come from human effort. A presence that you cannot define, yet you know as intimately as your own existence. This presence is the Christ of you. This center is the true identity. This quiet awareness is your spiritual self. But you may ask, how do we make this shift? How do we move from the human sense of life to the spiritual sense? The answer is not complicated. In fact, it is your striving that obscures the way. You shift into spiritual identity the moment you stop trying to be spiritual. The moment you rest, the moment you acknowledge, the moment you recognize that what you have been seeking is already the core of your being. It is not your task to perfect the human self. The human self cannot be perfected. The human self is the dream, and no dream can be made real. Your task is only to recognize what has always been true, that behind the dream stands the reality of your spiritual self, untouched, unaltered, eternal. This is why Goldsmith insisted that we release the attempt to improve our humanity. The human state is not the truth of us, and the more we try to refine it, the more we bind ourselves to it. The spiritual identity requires no improvement. It requires recognition. Once this recognition begins, the whole nature of life changes. You stop fighting appearances and begin resting in presence. You stop striving to get and begin realizing the fullness that already is. You stop fearing the world and begin seeing through its illusions. The shift from human identity to spiritual identity is not a destination, it is a remembrance. And each moment of remembrance deepens the realization that I and the Father are one is not a poetic phrase, it is the truth of your being. Rest in this. Let it unfold. Let it reveal itself gently, for your spiritual identity has never been missing. It has only awaited your recognition. My friends, now that we have opened the inner door to the truth of our spiritual identity, let us quietly approach the heart of the infinite way, the actual practice by which this truth becomes living experience. Not a technique, not a ritual, not a method to manipulate God or the universe, but the simple act of recognition. Recognition is the key, for you will never bring God into your life through effort. You will never reach God through striving. You will never summon the Christ presence through repetition of sacred words. You do not need to. The presence is already here, and so the practice is not the attempt to create something, but the realization of what already is. It is the shift from seeking to acknowledging, from trying to attain to resting in what has been true since before the foundation of the world. This is why Goldsmith said, "Do not try to reach God. Acknowledge God already present." Let us explore how this unfolds. Begin by becoming still, not forcing stillness, not battling thoughts, simply pausing long enough to notice the quiet undercurrent beneath all movement. In this soft stillness, withdraw your concern from the outer world for a moment. Do not try to solve. Do not try to fix. Do not try to change. The world of appearances will continue its movements, but you do not need to follow it right now. Turn inward, not to find something, but to become aware of the presence that has been here all along, a presence that does not shout, does not push, does not demand, a presence that reveals itself only when you stop trying to force spiritual experience and instead allow yourself to be carried by the invisible life that is living you. In this silence, just a moment of it, let the simple truth arise within your consciousness. I and the Father are one. Do not try to believe it. Do not try to repeat it with conviction. Do not try to make it true. It is true without your effort. Your role is only to recognize in the smallest, gentlest way that there is a presence within you that is not dependent on the body, not shaped by thoughts, not altered by circumstances. This presence is your life, This presence is the Christ of you. And the moment you acknowledge it, even lightly, even without feeling something in consciousness opens, this is the practice. Seek quietly. Acknowledge the presence. Rest in the awareness that God is here where you are as the life you are living. Do not attempt to make the mind empty. The mind does what the mind does. It produces thoughts, images, concerns. Let it. You are not the mind. You are the awareness behind the mind, the silent witness in which thoughts come and go like clouds drifting across a sky that is never disturbed. Each time you become aware of this silent witness, this spaciousness, this stillness, you are recognizing the Christ. You are recognizing your spiritual identity. You are recognizing the kingdom within. Practice this not as a discipline, not as a duty, but as a returning to what you have always been, a returning to the presence that has never left you. And remember, the practice is gentle, it is simple, it is quiet. One moment of recognition is enough to open the way. One breath of awareness is enough to feel the shift. One pause before reacting is enough to let the Christ reveal itself. This recognition must not be confined to meditation. Goldsmith never intended for the spiritual life to be limited to the cushion or the quiet room. The true practice is to recognize the presence in the midst of daily activity, while walking, while speaking, while facing difficulty, while experiencing joy. Each pause throughout the day becomes a doorway. You simply turn inward for a second and acknowledge, God is. The presence is here. I am not alone. I and the Father are one. There is no ceremony in this, no strain, no attempt to produce results. Recognition is enough. For you are not calling upon a distant God. You are becoming aware of the God that is your life. You are not reaching up. You are sinking inward. You are not asking. You are knowing. In this knowing, grace flows. In this knowing, peace emerges. In this knowing, the outer world begins to rearrange without your manipulation, because consciousness has taken its rightful place as the source of all unfoldment. Recognition is the gateway through which the infinite expresses into the finite. Recognition is the light that dispels the illusion of separation. Recognition is the foundation of Christ consciousness. It is the stillness in which the Christ whispers, I am here. I have always been here. Let this be your practice. Not perfection recognition, not force awareness, not seeking remembering. For the presence you seek is the presence you are. My friends, as we continue in this inner journey, we arrive at a place where many sincere seekers have stumbled, not because the path is difficult, but because certain deeply ingrained beliefs veil the truth from our recognition. These barriers are not sins. They are misunderstandings. They are not failures. They are shadows of inherited thought. They have no substance in spirit, but they can appear very real to the human sense of self. Let us gently bring these barriers into the light, not to wrestle with them, but to see through them. For once they are seen, they dissolve. And once they dissolve, the Christ within us shines forth unobstructed. The first barrier is guilt. Guilt is the belief that we have offended God, that we stand separate, that our mistakes, our past, our human frailties somehow create distance from the divine presence. But my friends, guilt exists only in the mind of man. There is no guilt in God. There is no condemnation in spirit. There is no judgment in the Christ. God does not withhold itself because of your past. God does not withdraw its presence because of error. God does not diminish its love because of human imperfection. It is only the human mind that imagines such things. The spiritual truth is this: your mistakes do not define you. Your spirit does. And the spirit of you is untouched, unaltered, unbroken, unchanged. The Christ within you has never sinned, never fallen, never wandered. It remains whole, pure, radiant. And it is this Christ that is your identity. Guilt dissolves in the presence of this realization, not through effort, not through penance, not through trying to be better, but through the simple acknowledgement that Spirit has never accused you, and therefore you are free. The second barrier is unworthiness. This is the belief that spiritual awakening is reserved for the advanced, the holy, the disciplined, the chosen. So many have said, this truth may be for others, but not for me. I am not ready. I am not spiritual enough. I have not practiced long enough. But how can you be unworthy of your own identity? How can you be unready for the presence that already constitutes your being? How can you be less spiritual than the spirit that is expressing as you? Unworthiness is the greatest illusion because it assumes that spiritual truth is something external that must be earned. But the Christ is not a prize. It is not an attainment. It is not granted by achievement. It is the nature of your very existence. It takes no worthiness to be what you already are. It takes only recognition. The Christ in you is not waiting for you to qualify. It is waiting for you to stop disqualifying yourself. And the third barrier, perhaps the most subtle, the most deeply ingrained, is religious conditioning. For many centuries, humanity has been taught that God dwells elsewhere, that the divine is separate from the individual, that holiness is accessed through intermediaries, institutions, or rituals. Many have been trained to fear questioning, to fear inner knowing, to fear anything labeled mystical, even when Jesus himself was the great mystic of his age. This conditioning creates hesitation in the soul. It whispers, be careful. It warns, this is too bold. It suggests you must go through proper channels. Yet the moment you turn within, you discover a presence that needs no permission, a presence that speaks in silence, not in dogma, a presence that reveals rather than instructs, a presence that is the very fulfillment of everything religion was meant to point toward. Let us understand this clearly. Religion can be a beautiful stepping stone, but it cannot replace revelation. Scripture can guide you, but it cannot take the place of experience. Teachers can point you inward, but they cannot see for you. The Christ is not reached through belief systems. The Christ is revealed through the silence of your own soul. And so these three barriers, guilt, unworthiness, conditioning, begin to fall away when you realize that none of them have any foundation in spirit. They do not exist in the kingdom within you. They exist only in the human mind, the personal sense of self, the accumulated memory of collective belief. You do not remove these barriers. You awaken from them, and recognition is the awakening. As you rest in the awareness of the presence, as you quietly acknowledge, I and the Father are one, these shadows lose their reality, they lose their authority, they lose their influence. And you begin to stand not as a human being trying to become spiritual, but as a spiritual being remembering the truth of your own eternal identity. The Christ in you has never been guilty. The Christ in you has never felt unworthy. The Christ in you has never been shaped by human teaching. The Christ in you merely waits for your recognition. Let this recognition dissolve whatever has obscured your vision. Let it clear away the mist. Let it reveal the inner light that has always been shining. For once these barriers fall, even slightly, the path into the kingdom becomes clear, effortless, inevitable. My friends, now that we have recognized the barriers that obscure the inner light, let us gently turn to the living of this truth, not in seclusion, not in monasteries, not in moments set apart from life, but in the midst of our daily activity. For the spiritual life is not lived apart from the world, it is lived through the world. Christ consciousness does not draw us away from life, it illumines life. The presence we discover in meditation is not meant to be left in the silence, it is meant to be carried into every encounter, every circumstance, every breath of ordinary existence. Joel Goldsmith always insisted that truth must be practiced, not as effort, but as remembrance, not as discipline, but as awareness, not as something we add, but as something we allow. And so, let us explore how this inner awareness can become the living center of our daily life. The first practice is the pause before reaction. In the human sense of self, we meet life with immediate responses: fear, judgment, worry, planning, resistance. But when you have tasted the inner presence, even faintly, you begin to recognize that you do not need to be governed by these automatic impulses. When a challenge appears, a bill, a conflict, a symptom, a disappointment, do not react instantly. Do not rush into human planning or mental struggle. Simply pause, even for one breath, and turn inward. In that pause, quietly acknowledge the truth. God is here. The presence is the only power. I and the Father are one. This single moment opens the door for grace to act before the human mind interferes. You see, the world teaches us to meet appearances with effort, but Christ consciousness meets appearances with recognition, and in that recognition, the appearance begins to lose its power. It no longer dictates your state. You remain centered in the presence that goes before you and makes the way straight. The second practice is seeing the Christ in others. This may be the most transformative application of the entire teaching. When we look at others through the human sense, we see behavior, personality, flaws, history, and roles. And in seeing these, we unconsciously reinforce them in ourselves and in them. But Goldsmith taught a higher vision. See through the person to the Christ. See through the behavior to the divine identity. This does not mean condoning unkindness or ignoring actions. It means that when you meet another soul, you silently recognize that behind the mask of human personality stands the same divine presence that lives as you. In moments of conflict, silently acknowledge, I behold the Christ of you. Your true identity is the same presence that lives in me, and something begins to shift. The energy changes, the reaction softens, and even if the other does not consciously realize it, your recognition awakens something within them. Grace meets grace. Light meets light. Consciousness responds to consciousness. The third practice is listening instead of forcing. In daily life, the human mind rushes to solve, to plan, to choose, to direct. But Christ consciousness listens. It waits. It allows guidance to rise from within rather than from fear or habit. When you face decisions, whether small or significant, become still and listen. You are not listening to an external voice. You are listening to the deep intelligence of the presence that knows your path better than your intellect ever could. In this listening, you discover that life becomes simpler. Choices become clear. You take the next step not out of anxiety, but out of inner assurance. And you begin to realize that you are not living your life alone. Life is living itself through you. The fourth practice is resting in the truth of supply. In human sense, supply is something to chase, to earn, to secure. But in Christ consciousness, supply is not external. It is a function of spiritual identity. It flows from the recognition that consciousness is the source of all good. When lack appears, do not fight it, do not fear it, pause, turn inward, and acknowledge. The infinite supply of spirit is the substance of my being. You are not asking for a supply. You are recognizing the source that has always sustained you. And as this recognition deepens, outer forms of supply adjust themselves without strain. The fifth practice is returning to presence throughout the day. This is not constant meditation. It is a subtle remembering, a gentle returning, a quiet acknowledgement that the divine presence is with you as you in every moment. Set no rigid schedule. Let the remembrance be spontaneous. Let it arise naturally. Each time a moment of stillness is felt, each time a breath brings you inward, simply acknowledge, the Christ is here. All is well. God is the life I am living. These brief recognitions, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, gradually become a continuous awareness, and this awareness becomes the atmosphere around you, the foundation beneath you, the peace within you. In this way, Christ consciousness becomes not a state visited occasionally, but a way of being, not an experience sought, but a presence recognized. Not a spiritual practice, but the very substance of your life. This is the practical application of truth. This is the infinite way lived moment by moment. This is how the kingdom within becomes the kingdom expressed. My friends, when you begin to live from the kingdom within, not occasionally, not as an idea, but as the silent foundation beneath every breath, something subtle yet profound begins to occur. The world you once feared loses its authority. The circumstances that once dictated your emotions no longer hold power. Life begins to unfold not from the outside in, but from the inside out. This change is not the result of effort. It is the fruit of recognition. It is the evidence of a shift in identity. It is the natural consequence of living from the presence rather than from the personal self. Let us explore the nature of this fruit. The first fruit is peace that does not depend on circumstances. In the human sense of self, peace comes and goes. It appears when things are favorable and vanishes the moment appearances turn dark. But when you begin to live from the kingdom within, you discover a peace that is not created by the world and therefore cannot be destroyed by the world. This peace is not emotional calm. It is spiritual assurance. It is the quiet certainty that all is well, even when the senses report otherwise. It is the recognition that behind every appearance stands a divine order, an invisible harmony, a presence that never leaves you. This peace becomes your atmosphere. It becomes your identity. It becomes the place from which you live. The second fruit is freedom from fear. Fear is born of separation. Fear arises when you believe you are alone, vulnerable, unprotected. But once you recognize that the presence lives as your very being, fear begins to dissolve. Not because you try to overcome it, but because you see through it. There is nothing to fear in a universe governed by one power. There is nothing to fear when you live from the source of all life. There is nothing to fear when the kingdom is within you. You move through the world with a new confidence, not human confidence, not willpower, but the quiet knowing that you are sustained by something greater than your personality, your plans, or your strength. The third fruit is a new relationship with supply. When you live from Christ consciousness, you no longer seek supply outside yourself. You understand that consciousness is the source of all form. Money, opportunities, people, solutions, these become channels, not causes. They are expressions, not origins. And because you no longer fear losing the channels, you no longer cling to them. Because you no longer look to them as your source, you no longer burden them with expectation, and because you no longer operate from lack, supply begins to flow with greater ease. You discover that you are never without what you truly need, because the source is never absent. You discover that the forms of supply may change, but the substance of supply is eternal. You discover that abundance is not something you achieve, it is something you recognize. The fourth fruit is healing, not always as the world defines it, but always as Spirit intends it. When you live from the kingdom within, the body begins to respond to a different rhythm. Stress diminishes, tension releases. The natural intelligence of the body aligns with the harmony of the presence. Healing may appear in the form of physical restoration, or it may appear as peace, acceptance, or inner transformation, but always healing unfolds as the revelation of wholeness already present. You do not heal by fighting disease. You heal by recognizing the perfection of your spiritual identity. The body follows consciousness. The fifth fruit is transformation in relationships. Where once there were conflicts, you now find grace. Where once there were misunderstandings, you now find clarity. Where once there were demands, you now find compassion. Not because you have changed others, but because you have changed the place from which you see them. You now meet others from the Christ within you, and this recognition calls forth the Christ within them. You become a presence of peace in every room you enter. You become a light in situations that once triggered reaction. You become a witness to the divine identity hidden beneath the human appearance. The sixth fruit is a sense of inner guidance. You no longer force decisions. You no longer rush to choose. You no longer wrench solutions out of fear. Instead, you listen, and the guidance comes sometimes as a quiet intuition, sometimes as a shift in feeling, sometimes as the simple sense of the next right step. The more you trust this inner direction, the more clearly it speaks. You begin to live not by human will, but by divine unfoldment. Life becomes orchestrated from within. Paths open without strain. Opportunities arise without forcing. Situations resolve without manipulation. This is the fruit of recognition. And finally, the seventh fruit, the greatest of them all, is a new sense of self. You no longer see yourself as a limited, struggling, fearful human identity trying to reach God. You recognize yourself as the very expression of the divine presence. You know, quietly, silently, humbly, I live, yet not I. The Christ lives me. And from this recognition arises a life of grace, a life of inner freedom, a life of deep, unshakable fulfillment, not because the outer world changed first, but because you changed your center, not because you achieved spirituality, but because you recognized Spirit, not because God came to you, but because you came home to God within you. This is the life that begins when you live from the kingdom. This is the life that unfolds through Christ consciousness. This is the life that cannot be touched by the fluctuations of the world. My beloved friends, as we come quietly to the close of this time together, let us remember that nothing spoken here becomes real through memory alone. Truth becomes living only through recognition. Revelation becomes experience only through practice. Christ consciousness becomes life only through the gentle, daily turning within. There is no final attainment. There is no moment in which you can say, I have achieved. For the spiritual life is not a mountain to climb, it is an unfolding, a deepening, a continual homecoming to the presence already here. Each day, in small, unhurried moments, return to the inner kingdom, not as obligation, not as duty, but as remembrance. Take a breath and quietly acknowledge, God is here. The presence is my life. I and the Father are one. Let this acknowledgement become the invisible thread running through your day. Let it guide you as a silent companion. Let it dissolve fear before fear rises. Let it soften your reactions before you react. Let it lift your burdens before you carry them. There is no need to strive. There is no need to improve the human self. There is only the need to recognize what has always been true. The kingdom is within you. The Christ is your identity. The presence is your companion. If tomorrow brings challenges, do not meet them alone. Pause even for a single breath and turn inward. If you find yourself anxious, do not condemn yourself. Simply remember, you have forgotten the presence. Return. Let the remembrance be your healing. Let the recognition be your strength. If you find yourself reacting, remember, reaction is the human sense of self. Recognition is the spiritual sense. Pause, turn, acknowledge the truth, and watch as the Christ consciousness displaces the human impulse. In this way, the spiritual life becomes natural, not something you add to your day, something that permeates your day, not something you strive to maintain, something you quietly remember. You will discover that the more you return to the inner kingdom, the more the outer world aligns without your manipulation. The more you acknowledge the presence, the more harmony appears without effort. The more you rest in your spiritual identity, the more life unfolds according to divine order rather than personal struggle. This is grace. This is the fruit of living from within. This is the infinite way. And so, let us end as we began, in silence. For in silence, the Christ speaks. In silence, the presence reveals. In silence, we discover that the journey we thought we were undertaking is already complete. The kingdom has never been far. It is closer than breath, closer than thought, closer than the sense of I. And every time you turn within, you return home. Let this awareness accompany you now. Let it sustain you. Let it live you. And may the quiet recognition of the presence be the light before your path, the peace within your heart, and the truth that guides you in every moment. Blessings, my friends. Rest in the kingdom, live from the kingdom. Recognize the kingdom, for it is here. It is now. It is you.